South, we have to say y'all. All right?
They say yo-yo here.
Okay, yo-yo. I don't understand. I mean, I would have to learn your government structure, how your government officials go about making decisions, and then how those decisions are put into public policy, and how those policies are evaluated as to whether they are successful or not. I don't have to do that because if I return, or maybe I should say when I return to Taiwan, I'm not going to come here to debate. I'll be coming here for the sole purpose of helping you come to the United States to debate. So that's what this lecture's about. Because it's not me coming to Taiwan, it's about all of you coming to the United States. And I dare say you probably know absolutely nothing about how our government works, because we already know that everyone in this room wants to know what EO is.
EXO.
Well, EXO. Same thing. Right? Does anyone know what EXO is? Anyone in this room?
You just had an answer from over here.
What was the answer over here?
Applesauce.
It's a kind of
Applesauce.
It's a kind of seafood sauce that they cook with here.
Is that it? I'm sorry, Houston, we have a problem. That answer did not compute. So, while we work our way to understand XO, or EO, or EIEIO, let's begin at the elementary level and talk about how we do business in the United States, how our government works. First of all, we have three different levels of government. We have the local government, which could be a city or a county. You all know what cities are. Taipei is a city, right? Do you all have county governments here, or counties?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's the same thing. It's a geographical area that the country's divided up in. And then we have the next level of government, which is the state government. And there are 50 of them. Okay? Very few high school topics deal with issues that are specific and unique to just the local or the state government. Next year's topic will be one of those exceptions, but that's next year. Because in the United States, the folks that are primarily responsible for bridges and roads are state and local officials. But that's next year. We're talking about this year. And the government entity would be the national government. Our national government is centered in Washington, D.C., and there are three branches of our government. The first that I'll tell you about is the judicial branch. It's the courts. It's where laws are interpreted. So if and when we have a dispute between a couple of parties, we have to go to a third party to find out which person wins that dispute. That's what happens in the judicial branch. Now, we also have the element of crime in society, unfortunately. Fortunately, you all have a lot smaller problem than that than we do. And that also involves the judicial branch, where people are put on trial for their misdeeds. And their guilt or innocence is determined, and for those found guilty, they're sentenced with some kind of a punishment. It might be to prison, or it might just be a fine, it might be probation. We're not that concerned with the judicial branch of government, but you at least should know there's a branch there. The next two branches of government are, for the most part, the people who make policy and then enact or administer the policy.
Take notes, guys, take notes.
The people who make policy are the members of the legislative branch. They're referred to as Congress. They have that big domed building that we will see this summer. Some of us will. There are two branches of Congress. The first is called the House of Representatives. There are 435 representatives. 465, isn't it? 435. You want me to do that? I can do the board if you want.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
I can help them, because we have 6th graders with new to go.
Okay. Yes.
This one? Yeah.
We have better markers
Okay.
there someplace.
Over here is this judicial branch. Remember, that's the courts. And their job is to interpret laws. The legislative branch, this one is. Oh, yeah.
Why don't you throw that marker out? 'Cause-
This one?
Yeah, the bad one.
Here. Happy New Year. You're welcome. Okay? The legislative branch makes laws. Can you all see? Did I turn it enough?
Maybe we should put it back to the original spot. Right there. Okay, good. Yeah.
How's that? Everybody? You guys okay? Can you see okay?
You just can't read the marker that you...
Yeah, I use, yes.
A little left because it's blocked by the... Thank you.
All right, now I'll trace.
This is very important. You need to pay attention to this section of the lecture, okay? Because policy debate and debating in the States it's all about government. You need to understand how the United States government works.
Take your notes. Put that mouse on battery. I don't have paper. Really?
All right. We should do it. All right, I'll stand over on this side here.
Scott Brown.
There's a senator from...
There's a senator from Massachusetts called Scott Brown, and Scott's having a moment here, an illusion, if you will. Wild wishful thinking. So, okay. So the judicial branch we talked about, that's the courts. That's where they handle disputes. That's what where they interpret the laws. Okay? The second branch over here is the legislative branch. That's where they make the laws. And there's two divisions of the legislative branch. The first is the House of Representatives, where there are 435 members. The second is the Senate, where there are 100 members. Let me talk for just a moment about how we got to these numbers. Back in the 1700s, when the United States was formed, the United States was, the colonies which later became the initial 13 states, were all concerned about a powerful central government. Because you have to remember, the reason that there was a Revolutionary War was because basically the people in the United States that came over from England were upset with the dictatorial powers of the king. The taxes without representation and the authoritarian decisions of the king. So in order to stay away from that repeating that situation, they formed independent colonies. And each colony did its own thing. And it was a mess. Because each colony had its own currency. But when you went to another colony, that meant you had to go into a currency exchange, which really didn't exist back then. Okay? So it was just an impossible situation. The Articles of Confederation, which was the governing document that these 13 colonies put together, proved to be totally unworkable. So after the Revolutionary War, they basically threw out the Articles of Confederation and they sat down under the guise of George Washington and Ben Franklin and James Madison and Thomas Jefferson, people whose names you've heard, and they held a constitutional convention where they wrote our Constitution. It almost didn't happen. And the reason it almost didn't happen was because the small states were worried about being consumed by the big states. And there were more small states than there were big states. But once again, it was a legitimate concern. So the compromise that they made was to divide these two houses of the legislative branch, whereby one house with 435 members would basically over-represent the small states. I'm sorry, would over-represent the large states, because the more people, the more representatives. To balance that out in the Senate, each state, regardless of size, got 2 senators. Which means originally we didn't have 100 senators, did we? How many original states did we have? 13. 2 senators per state would have been 26. Okay? To this very day, that is a concern in the United States. Now, it's no longer a concern as if, oh geez, Rhode Island's going to be taken over by New York. We've moved beyond those little self-concerns. But the problems of Rhode Island to Rhode Islanders are just as important. And the problems of the country that we have are just as important to people in Rhode Island, which is the smallest state in the United States, as it is to New York, which is one of the largest. It's not the largest, even though New York City is. Okay? So we still have the system where the House of Representatives is based on population, and every 10 years when we do a census, the 435 seats of the House are divvied up, and states that have had population growth, like my state of Florida, ended up just recently getting 2 more members of Congress. Some of the states, particularly in the old Rust Belt or manufacturing area, like Michigan, lose a couple of positions. Okay? So the House still represents, and if you will, over-represents the large states. And to this day, the small states balance that out by having the same power in the Senate, 2 senators. So when we have a problem in the United States and we need a public policy, a government solution to that problem,
Here's the map of the
it's done right here.
Okay, the bottles. Move the bottles away.
Oh, is this one?
I'll take that.
Okay, this is, do you want to use this visual?
Sure.
How delegates are divided.
This, and what this does, by the way, is this map doesn't, when I say it's divided by size, size is population, not square miles geography, okay?
Even though California has the most.
Right. But
Here's
here, right up here, RI, right up here is Rhode Island. Little bitty place right up here. It almost looks like it's an appendage of Massachusetts
Tell
or
me how many
Connecticut.
delegates is that? Okay, on the column. It tells you how many delegates. How many delegates? Well, Connecticut, how many delegates Connecticut has? Huh? 30. How about California?
15.
And why is that?
More.
Why is that?
They don't have that.
More, bigger population, right? Okay, good.
Yeah, now, let me also explain one other thing. This map is delegates to the political conventions, and perhaps those numbers are not necessarily proportional, but they certainly do make the point, okay? California is the most populated state in the United States, and it has more members of Congress than any other state. And it has more members clearly than this little country up here that's got a line to it called Rhode Island. Okay? So California, in essence, is overrepresented in Congress, in the House. But Rhode Island is overrepresented in the Senate. Now, when we have, as I was starting to say, when we have a problem in the United States that needs government attention, that needs a solution, those solutions come from Congress, from the legislative branch. Not only do we get the solution to the problem, but we get payment. The money is appropriated to enact the solution. After Congress finishes its work by passing what's called a bill into law, that law then goes to the third branch of government that's called the executive branch. Does anyone know who the head of the executive branch is? The president, correct. If our government was a corporation, the president would be the CEO.
Here's a picture of the three branches of the U.S. government.
I've been on all of this.
I like executive.
Okay?
They look like they're-
Under the president, is a series of departments, 12 of them, that form the president's cabinet. And they're divided by areas of interest. For example, you have the Justice Department. That deals with legal issues. You have the Agriculture Department, which deals with problems and solutions in the area of farming and agriculture. You have the Treasury Department. Those are the people that deal with money. They collect tax revenue and they print out checks to pay for government bills and obligations. You have 12 different branches, and those branches will be involved depending on what the program is. NASA's where? Interior? One of those departments is called the Interior Department, meaning it deals with issues interior to our country. And NASA is in the Interior Department.
Who knows what NASA is? Okay.
All together now. Very good. National Aeronautics and Space Administration. So, when the legislative branch decides that we're going to build the X program, whatever the X program is, or enforce or implement the plan of the affirmative team, what they do is they send it over to the executive branch and the appropriate department, who then actually implements the program. They hire the people needed to run the program. They acquire the goods and services needed so the program would be efficient. Let's see. Yes.
Secretary Interior. Okay, so here's the president.
Okay.
Cabinet position. Vice president. Chief Senate president.
Who is no longer
He's no longer
Mr.
there. He's
Manuel.
Chicago mayor now.
That's right.
So Secretary of Labor. Secretary of Transportation. Secretary Interior. Secretary of Agriculture. Education. Energy. Housing and Urban Development. Health and Human Services. Veterans Affairs. Commerce. What's commerce, you guys? Huh? Yeah, trade, okay.
Great, very good.
Defense. Yeah, I just want to
Okay, yeah.
have them have the concept. Homeland Security. Okay, but the people are not updated, okay? Don't look at the people. Ambassador General, okay. So those are the cabinets under the President of the United States.
Okay.
Okay.
So when the resolution says that the United States should do something, what is implied in there is that that something would be done by normal means. That's a term of art and debate. Is that a new term for you all, normal means?
Something that's reasonable.
Okay. Normal means basically says that the law will be passed and enacted as any law normally would. And as we know, the affirmative plan becomes the resolution, and everything else becomes potential counterplan material. And for those that participated last Tuesday, we also found out that the negative sometimes can propose more than one counterplan, didn't we?
Yes. So anything other than the U.S. as the agent can be a counterplan, right? You guys know that, right?
Well, even within the U.S.
Yes. If
Anything other
if you
than
have a
normal means.
state government do it, then it becomes a counterplan too.
Okay?
It's like, it's too
Yes.
right space is all.
Is there a law like if the federal government didn't like the president, can they like fire the president?
Okay, the question is, can we fire the president?
Yes. Vote him out.
It's called, there's two ways that we can fire the president. Every 4 years, we elect a new president. And under our system, a person can serve no more than 2 terms as president. So if we, as a society, don't like what the president's doing, we simply vote him out and vote someone else in. If the president has committed high crimes and misdemeanors, then the president can be impeached or removed from office. And if and when that happens, there is a trial that is held with the House of Representatives basically prosecuting or presenting the case against the president and the Senate serving as judges.
This has happened too.
It has happened 3 times and almost a 4th time. The impeachment, actually 5 times, because President Clinton was impeached but it never went to trial. Okay? But the last important note in history was when there were impeachment proceedings against President Nixon back in the early 70s because of high crimes and misdemeanors that he committed in what has become known as the Watergate scandal. And before there was a vote to impeach him, President Nixon resigned. And when the president resigns, the vice president takes over. And this morning I told you that I had interviewed someone mentioned that I had interviewed 5 presidents. One of those was Gerald Ford, who took over when Nixon resigned. I interviewed Mr. Ford when he was still a member of the House, where he was Speaker of the House. Okay? But that has happened in my lifetime. Okay, here comes the secret that you all been waiting for. Normal means is when an idea is introduced as a bill in either the House or Senate, it's debated, it's voted on by both chambers, the idea has to be approved by both the House and the Senate, and when they both agree, they send that bill to the President to be signed into law. That's normal means. Anything else, or any other way to do something, would be negative counterplan ground, and that's where we come with XO.
XO. What is XO?
Or E-I-E-I-O. EO.
You should ask them, what is it?
Okay, remember I told you the executive branch implements and administers laws. In doing that, you have to give the CEO of the company or the executive certain latitude in which to make decisions. And the way that the president does that is by issuing executive orders. E or XO, executive orders. The President of the United States is often referred to as the most powerful man in the world. At some point in the future, it will probably be the most powerful woman in the world, but we haven't arrived there yet.
Almost happened.
Almost.
Oh, no way.
Well, we've had 2 women run as vice presidential candidates, neither elected. And then we have had on occasion several women run in the primaries for president. However, the only one that has really mounted any kind of a serious threat is Hillary Clinton.
And he stepped down.
Okay? So, because we give the most powerful person in the world the power to basically say, this is what we're going to do, in many cases, the president can issue an executive order to implement the affirmative plan. And as a result, we have a potential negative counterplan. Now, on some topics, there would be negative teams that would argue that instead of the federal government being the agent that implements the plan, that it should be implemented by the 50 states. And sometimes, instead of the United States government in any capacity issuing the plan, the negative might argue that it should be an international cooperation effort. And so, and that just opens the door to all kinds of possibilities. Because you could run a counter plan that would say that the United States will work in conjunction with China, Russia, India, Brazil, the European Union, and the list goes on and on and on. Or you could just simply argue that the United States, before doing something, should consult China, India, Russia, the European Union, or maybe it's not consult or work with another country, but maybe it's consult or work through an international organization like the United Nations, NATO, for example.
So you guys, these
The
are all
G8.
different variations of counterplan involving the government of the United States.
Okay? Now, on the NASA, on the space topic, the topic, regardless of whether it's space or not, the resolution kind of limits who you would talk to. For example, next year, the topic deals with building bridges and roads.
Transportation.
Now, why in the world would the United States ever want to consult with China on building a bridge across the Mississippi River?
What? Why?
Okay?
Because they want to.
Jealousy.
Well, I can give you some idea why.
Jealous.
Because right now,
Why what?
things like concrete and steel worldwide are in very short supply. And a lot of it has to do with the modernization,
No, China wants
not
to
only in
invest
China, but in the
US.
BRIC. India, Brazil, as well as China and Russia.
Actually, China has already said now it wants to invest in U.S. transportation infrastructure.
Well, and that's an investment part of it, but perhaps you're even consulting for resources, okay? Because if the United States and China both go for the same resources, that only pushes the price up on the market. And it becomes more expensive for both countries. So maybe what you would want to do next year, just hypothetically, is consult with the players that are buying things and coordinate what it is you're doing so you don't have runaway cost on a project. Because runaway cost could certainly be a problem. And if we can prevent that, we now have a unique negative advantage. But that's what we'll talk about in summer camp this summer for those of you that come. Okay? Yes?
Like,
Yep.
Then can we use like asteroid mining for the counter plan for next year?
Can you use asteroid mining
As a counterplan
as
for
a
next year's
counterplan for
topic.
next year?
Like you get the material.
Scott?
I would say that you definitely could,
Okay.
because there could be some things that both could solve for, but it probably wouldn't be the best strategic thing for you to use.
Okay. And those are things we're going to talk about this week when we talk about counterplan theory and everything. I don't want to go too far in that today. I pretty much wanted to give you this introduction to the way things are done. Because you need to understand how we go about doing things, how our government goes about accomplishing things in the United States. So you'll be able to get your arms around the potential counterplan material that's available. Let me do step a little bit over that line that I just drew and talk a little bit about the executive order counterplan, okay? The reason why the negative T might propose that the executive do a counterplan as opposed to a legislative effort is they might argue it's just more efficient because all you have to do is have the president say, go do it, guys. Whereas in our system right now, trying to get anything through our legislative branch is virtually impossible. As a society, America is divided practically 50-50.
But if you wanted funds for something, it would still have to go into the budget and it would have to be legislatively approved, no?
Yes. I mean, obviously, to pay for things, the legislature would have to. However, that's not hard and strict because there are efforts, there are programs that happen as a result of executive orders that get checks cut. It's magic and hocus pocus because the way the budget process is done in our country is magic and hocus pocus because we just do whatever we darn well please and worry about paying for it whenever.
Issue bonds.
And sometimes whenever might be never. And you know, as long as China's willing to buy our debt,
Bonds, right?
by God, let's go do more. Okay?
Not good.
But we are divided. And because of that political divide, whenever something is approved, there's consequences. One side's going to be upset. And there's consequences to being upset. Or there might be a trade-off in that budget process. In order to pay for X, we need to cut Y. And my goodness, Y is such a great program. Why would we ever want to cut it? There's a downside to cutting it. So there's your disadvantage, perhaps. Whereas with the executive order, like I said, it's hocus pocus. Okay? And we'll go a little bit more. I just, somehow or another, we got into everyone wanting to know what this XO was. All right? But that in a nutshell is our government. The one thing you must understand, and I'm sure that Ms. Chan has taught you this, is there's the word in the resolution that says should. Okay? You never have to prove that the affirmative plan will be approved.
No, we haven't actually talked about
You haven't?
fiat power. No, not yet.
Okay. Well, let's go there for a minute. The word should means ought to, but not necessarily will. Okay? And so your obligation at the affirmative is to say that the resolution ought to be approved. But you do not have an obligation to prove that it will actually become law by being passed by the legislative branch and signed into law by the president.
So what that means, guys, is that when we have the resolution, we don't have to doubt that it will happen. We don't have to fight about that word should as a topicality. So we just assume that it will happen. That we assume that the government has that power, and so we don't have to worry about that part of the debate.
Which gives us the next term that I'll give you, which is called fiat. F-I-A-T.
Fiat power. Write it down, guys. Fiat power.
Powers?
Yeah, fiat.
The affirmative is basically in debate given fiat power, which is nothing more than this mythical power. What's your name? That's correct. It means nothing more than in the debate, if you're on the affirmative, you have been given the power to assume that our plan will be adopted for your discussion. And the negative has the power to assume that their counter plan will be adopted. So now we can move forward and have arguments over the merits of the two policies. Okay? Does everybody have at least some kind of a clear picture as to how our government is set up in the United States?
Any questions or doubts?
Any?
So what is a fiat power, you guys? What is a fiat
A
power?
mystical power that's mythical. That assumes that the affirmative sign will work and the negative counter plan will.
Yes, when an affirmative presents a plan and when the negative presents a counter plan, we're not going to fight over, well, that will never happen. We're not going to fight over that. The president will never approve. We're not going to fight over that. We're just going to assume that it will happen so we can go on and have our discussions over other things. Okay?
Yeah.
That's fiat power.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. I told you the president is elected for 4 years. Sometimes an upcoming election will lead to arguments that can be presented in a debate. And when we talk about various disadvantages, the politics disadvantage will introduce that concept to you. Because when a person is running for re-election, who's president of the United States?
President.
Very good, okay? Barack Obama. And we have an election this November. where he is going to run for re-election against a Republican, and it looks like, although it's not certain yet, but it looks like that Republican is going to be Mitt Romney. So in an election year, presidents that are running for re-election do not want to do anything that might cost them votes. Especially now, because every vote will more than likely count in this election. By all appearances, this is going to be a very close election. And so sometimes that becomes an argument in a politics debate that if the president signs the affirmative plan into law, it will cost him votes and he will be voted out of office, and one of two things will happen. Either policies that he supports will no longer be implemented, or policies his opponent supports that would become implemented because his opponent will now win the election. And there's impacts to both of those.
Something very interesting came up during the debate on Saturday here, because one of the students raised a political DA and said, well, you know, this is an election year, you wouldn't want to be spending the money. And the other team said something that was quite interesting. They said, well, you know, the president can wait until after November to push this through. When you're debating, is there an assumption that when you put your plan forward, it becomes part of the public domain and the debate over it must happen immediately?
Implementation of the affirmative plan happens when the judge signs the ballot for the affirmative. I mean, that's just kind of the stated rule. Which now leads us to still another counterplan idea that's called the delay counterplan. Implement the affirmative plan on November 4th, day after the election, or whatever day the election is this year. Okay.
What if you read two counter plans and one of them was do the affirmative on April 4th and another one to do it on June 4th? Do you think that's fair? Probably not.
But you're going to have to explain why it's not
Is it fair to be
But
two
if you don't
counter plans?
understand that it's unfair, then you're going to let the other team have it.
That's right.
Yeah. It is your responsibility to understand why that's unfair. Play that.
And it's your responsibility to understand why those dates might be important too.
Right.
Because the person, the negative team advocating that, may not have a reason why those dates are important. They're just saying it. So you're going to have to understand that there's elections coming up, or there's nominating conventions coming up, and all of those have an impact into what becomes law in the United States. Questions? Everybody should have a question or two. Is our government different than yours?
Yes.
A lot different?
Yes.
Yeah. You don't have any states. Don't get bogged down by the states. They're nothing more than geographical entities that are another layer of government. And on the topic, on the NASA topic, I'm not sure the states and local, that's not ground, is there, Scott?
No.
Okay.
I don't think Rhode Island could launch a satellite.
Yeah. Yes.
Well,
Yes,
Taiwan
sir.
is launching a satellite, though.
No, I don't think Rhode Island could.
Taiwan is? Really?
Okay, hold on here. Yes.
Have a launching rocket thing.
Hey guys. 2 ears. I need to hear. What was it? Delay counter plan agrees with the affirmative except for one thing.
Time frame.
The date, time frame. Their advantage will come from their date, or they will avoid a disadvantage from their date. Okay, I saw a hand over here, didn't I? Yes.
There's no federal government in Taiwan.
There is no federal government in Taiwan?
Well, there's a central government.
Okay.
Is there that in China?
You have a president, right?
Except the premier, the government is run, the cabinet is run by the premier. The premier answers to the president.
Okay. But it's the premier that's the central, the CEO, if you will, running the day-to-day, doing the nuts and bolts.
The president is more like the chairman of the board.
Right, whereas our president is the chairman and CEO and in charge of all of this staff that Ms. Chin had all of those departments up here, okay, implementing the laws of the land. So that is a fundamental difference. It probably, at the end of the day, in both systems, someone is making the law, or some group, and someone or some group is implementing or administering the law, right? Now, let me also give you one other comment about this person right here. The vice president. That sounds terribly important, doesn't it? The fact of the matter is virtually in modern times, there's been only one vice president that has had any input per se. And that was
Dick Cheney.
That was Dick Cheney. President Bush II, vice president. The input or the power of the vice president depends entirely on how much the president wants to use that person or how much power the president wants that person to have. In most cases, the vice president's going to be the ceremonial person. They will go and visit other countries, they'll show up in public, and at re-election time, they're the bad dogs. Because it wouldn't be very presidential for the president to come out and start calling people names. But the vice president? Oh.
He's important though if something happens to the president.
If the president dies, the vice president becomes president.
Whoa! Okay.
Whoever the vice president
Kill the president, yeah.
Which?
What country? I'm not sure what country.
The House of Representatives is led by the Speaker of the House, who is nothing more than a member, one of the 435, who is elected by the party that holds the majority of the seats. Right now in the United States, the Republicans have the majority in the House of Representatives. And they have elected a member of Congress from Ohio by the name of John Boehner to be the Speaker of the House. The head of the Senate is called President, President Pro Tem. That is the Vice President. When it appears there's going to be a 50-50 vote, the Vice President will show up in the Senate to cast the deciding vote. Other than that, if it's not a presidential address or an inauguration, you won't see the Vice President in the Senate.
Good.
Okay?
Nice
But if
job.
you were to watch the State of the Union, how many of you have seen the State of the Union address? Anybody? That the President gives every year?
Not very many.
It happens in the halls of Congress, and the President's down here, and up here, over the right shoulder, is the Speaker of the House, and over the left shoulder is the President of the Senate, who's the Vice President. And what's really interesting is when the President goes on and on, like I'm doing right now, to see if either one of them falls asleep. Most of them are able to at least control themselves and not.
Robert Byrd fell asleep.
That's right. We have had some that have fallen asleep.
Whoa.
Or apparently falling. I can appreciate them. I mean, you know, it's past their bedtime, I'm sure.
There's a picture of the
Right.
State of the
People fall asleep.
Oh, here we go. President Obama,
Yo.
Vice President Biden, and Speaker Boehner.
Vader.
We did make history in 2008. For 2 years, the Speaker of the House was Madam Speaker.
Who else?
Yep. Nancy Pelosi, a member of Congress from California. First time that we've had a woman speaker. But in the 2010 elections, the the Republicans won more seats and won the majority of the House. So Nancy Pelosi now is the minority. And Speaker Boehner, who has the majority. She's the minority leader. He's referred to as Speaker or the majority leader. All right? That's probably a little bit more minutia that you didn't need, but just an extra flavor. Questions about our government?
Any questions about the delegates? How are they represented? Huh?
House of Representatives. How do we determine? How do we divvy up 435? I'm sorry? Population. I heard the word.
What about
yes.
the Senate here?
How do we divvy up Senate?
2 per
Very
state.
good, regardless of the size. 2 for Rhode Island, 2 for California. 2 for everybody. Okay, leave this up for a minute because there is one other concept that sometimes enters into debate, but even if it doesn't, I think will find interesting, okay?
Okay.
We have 3 branches of government, and our Constitution gives each branch certain powers to basically check and balance the other 2 branches. And that's what we call it. It's called checks and balances. Okay? So let me briefly describe how that works. First of all, we'll start on the right-hand side here. The legislative branch can check and balance both of those branches because they have the power of impeachment. They can not only remove the president upon proper testimony and vote, but they can remove judges. Judges in the United States federal judges are appointed a lifetime appointment. However, if at any time a judge acts improperly, the Congress can impeach. The second way that the legislative branch theoretically checks and balances the other 2 is through the budget process. They hand out the money. We just won't give the courts money so they can't have new courthouses or have more judges. Okay? The executive branch checks the judicial branch because it is the president who appoints members of the Supreme Court. There's a second process, though, in that appointment. By the legislative branch, it checks the judicial branch because the president's appointment has to be confirmed by the Senate. Now it's important to note, it's the Senate and not the entire House that confirms judges, federal judges. Okay? The executive branch checks the legislative branch because the president can veto legislation.
He doesn't have to sign it.
There's 2 ways to veto. He can just out and out not sign it, or if the timing is right, he cannot sign it, and if the bill goes for a period of 30 days while the legislature is in recess, it automatically dies. Recess is exactly what it means. Within the terms in which the legislative branch meets, they take breaks. They agree to go home for the holidays. They agree to take off for election times, where business just isn't done. The judicial branch checks both of these other 2 branches because of the concept called judicial review. The Supreme Court can, upon proper argument, determine that an act of the legislature that was signed by the president is unconstitutional. Have any of you heard the term Obamacare? Can anyone tell me what happened a week ago today related to Obamacare?
No more health care.
A week ago today, for 3 days, last Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, lawyers argued before the Supreme Court both sides of whether Obamacare is constitutional or not. And ultimately, the Supreme Court, probably in June, will render its decision. It could be to uphold the entire law, which is what the administration wants. It could be a ruling that throws out one part of the law. That part's, by the way, called the individual mandate. It's a health insurance provision. Or the court could rule to throw out not only that part, but the entire law, which is 2,700 pages long and 10,000 pages in implementation.
It's a waste of money and time.
Well, but the Supreme, it's a great example of how the Supreme Court can review the work of the other two branches of government and check the other two branches by ruling that their work is unconstitutional.
But only after a bill has passed.
Yes. Oh, yes. The interesting thing is that the checks and balance powers of the legislative and the executive branch are clearly enumerated in our Constitution. The concept of judicial review is not. It, in essence, is a power that the judicial branch gave itself very early on in our country's history in a ruling called Marbury versus Madison. And that was a political deal where they were changing presidents, and before the new president came in, the old president started doing a lot of judge appointments. And the issue was whether that was constitutional or not. And the Supreme Court, in taking that case and in handing down that decision, basically acquired the power of judicial review. They self-granted it. Now, they did make some kind of a mention that they felt the Constitution really gave them that power, even though it wasn't articulated clearly in the Constitution. Okay? Any other questions?
Let's give them a break for 10 minutes.
Yeah, we're going to take a break. Hold on just a second, please. When we come back, Scott's got a questionnaire that we would like for you all to do.
We might get them up and moving before that.
Yeah.
We'll talk a little bit.